Oh my God, just doing the research on you, Joel. Holy cow, dude. You have been everywhere. You are Google.com.
Yes, yeah. Well, I'm 80 years old. What can I tell you? I've been there and done that twice. So, and hope to continue.
To put this book together, it must have been a self-implosion because of your personal experiences. You've been through so much, and I'm just so glad that you finally released it from your mind, body, and soul.
Thank you. Well, you can thank Joaquin Phoenix for that. No, seriously. I mean, he was the one who suggested, after listening to a lot of stories that I was talking. His mother was my secretary at NBC for 5 years.
Right.
I started, as you know, he and his family, his brothers and sisters, in the business. And, River was, obvious, his brother River. I describe him in the book as he looked like a sun god with rays radiating from him.
Oh my God, so true.
And Joaquin was like, oh, you want to hug him and say everything's going to be all right. that was. But years and years later, this was after River had died, and I was over at Joaquin's house, and by now he had become, a movie actor and was doing very well in a lot of quirky leading roles, and I'm sitting there, and his mother and I are talking war stories at NBC when he was 8, and he's laughing, and he said, man, you got to write this stuff down. That was 15 years ago, and I went home and I started writing this stuff down.
Wow.
Yep. That's how it happened.
Don't you like when you say writing it down? Because I'm a daily writer. I use a fountain pen every single day, and I just because I believe there's a connection between the heart and that page, which then becomes the story for others to hold on to.
I didn't. I used a computer.
Okay. I'll let your 10 little fingers do the walking then and the talking.
Well, and actually, you know why? Because I was among in my junior high school. We had a typing class.
Yeah,
they taught us how to type, and so I used it. And I went home and I literally wrote because I knew when he said write this stuff down, in my head immediately I thought of what would be interesting and funny and amusing. And I wrote the first part of David Hasselhoff, ... blame me, because I cast David in his 3 network shows. And by this time he'd become sort of a punchline. So I knew that this was a good place to start. So literally I went home and I wrote it that night.
What do you do with someone like David Hasselhoff, who in Germany he was God, but here in the States he was one. We didn't take him so seriously. I mean it was like, how do you put up with a personality like that?
Well, first of all, I met him several times, and he's a very sweet, nice guy. That's number one. And he was doing what we. I can't curse on this show, but the shows he were doing, shall we say, he was not doing Cheers and Hill Street Blues. Right. He was doing, nonsense shows. He was doing fluff. He was doing very commercial shows, But you can't blame the actor for doing them. That was what he was doing, and he did them very, very well. So and I think he only became. First of all, he has a very funny last name, which doesn't help.
Yeah.
And then he did that. He unfortunately, his daughter taped him doing that video when he was a little out of it and eating a hamburger off the floor, and. But I mean, you should not hold that against the guy. I think the guy is very much maligned, and he has a funny last name. Yep. What can I say?
The name of the book for listeners is Sex, Drugs, and Pilot Season, Confessions of a Casting Director. Do you roll your eyes a lot in over those 80 years that you say that you've been alive, even though you look like you're barely 59?
Thank you. No, I don't roll. I roll my. I may roll my eyes, but they're in. It's wonder. It's wonder that I was lucky enough to, and I think one of the reasons that I did well, I didn't just work in one aspect of the business. I started on Broadway, meeting a wonderful, incredible woman named Pearl Bailey, who brought me to California. I worked in summer stock. I worked on Broadway. I worked in television. I worked in reality television. I worked in scripted television. I cast 4 movies, but of the 4 movies, 3 of those movies have become iconic: Grease, Airplane, and the Rocky Horror Show.
Yeah.
So, and I've drawn from all of these experiences, that's how I became good at what I did, because I didn't just limit myself to one thing.
What did you see in Meatloaf since you cast that? Because I think Meatloaf was such a major part, and the world didn't know who and what Meatloaf was.
I'm going to top over you. I had absolutely nothing to do with that.
Okay.
No, Meatloaf, when I was casting Rocky Horror Show, we had worked with wonderful casting directors in New York.
Yeah.
And Meatloaf walked into an audition in New York. Okay, simple. No, what I did have to do with, I had to manipulate Susan Sarandon into the movie.
Wow.
Susan, and I don't know how much time I have, so I'm trying to make it short. But basically, Susan, I knew Susan wanted to do it. I had met Susan Sarandon and her then husband, Chris Sarandon, in New York. And I had a little dinner party at my dinner party, spaghetti and meatballs on laps. So in my one-bedroom apartment in California. And at this dinner party was a man named Barry Bostwick and his manager, Bob Lamont. Well, I didn't realize this, but Susan and Barry locked eyes, and 2 days later, she left Chris Sarandon, and she and Barry were a couple.
Wow.
Okay, so that's background to all of this. And by the way, this was happening in front of me, and I had no idea it was happening. So, but this was around the time we were casting the movie. And I knew that Susan wanted to do it because she had seen it, she'd seen the play and loved it. But she had brand new agents, and she didn't want to offend her brand new and powerful agents. And what had happened is I had called her agents and said, I'd like to set up an audition for Rocky Horror. I'd like Susan to come in. And they cut me off and said, oh, no. This is not the kind of project we want for her, and she certainly won't audition. So that, and then in my mind goes, okay, you're going to play that game? Well, watch my game. And so I called Bob Lamont, and I told him to tell his client, Barry, bring Susan to his audition, and I will take care of everything else. So Barry comes in for his audition. And by the way, what Barry didn't know was the director, Jim Sharman, already knew Barry's Broadway work, and so Barry was a lock. Okay. He was only auditioning as a formality, but he didn't know this. So I get up on the stage and start reading with Barry. And I get 2 sentences into it, and I say, this is ridiculous. Why are you reading with me? Why am I playing Janet? Susan, can you come up and help me with this? Could you please read with Barry? I think it might be a better read.
Look at you.
So Susan comes up on stage and reads with Barry. And the Jim Sharman, the director, turns to me and said, who is she? She's wonderful. And I told him. He said, can she sing? I said, I don't know. And I said, Susan, can you sing? And she said, well, I didn't prepare anything. I said, well, can you sing Happy Birthday? And she sang Happy Birthday in that same sweet soprano voice that you hear. So that's how Susan Sarandon got into the movie. Wow. Without offending anybody, because at that point, it was an offer. She didn't have to audition. So the next day I called. They said, we're offering Susan Sarandon the role. There's a little coda to that, of course, if you remember in the book. She and Barry, who were kind of a couple, go off to London to shoot the movie. And 2 weeks into shooting, they are no longer a couple.
Oh, no.
And then, as I say in the book, and Susan sort of liked to boff upwards because her next 2 boyfriends were Louis Malle and David Bowie.
Did directors approach you, or was it one of those where you would hear something on the street about a movie or a Broadway play and you'd go, oh, I've got the perfect person, I'm going to approach them?
No, that never happened.
So they always came to you then?
They always came to me, and after a certain point, things were just offered.
Okay.
The thing that Grease was a no-brainer because I had worked with John Travolta in Boy in the Plastic Bubble, which I produced. So and I had basically put I put the director into that project as well, and the same 2 were doing the movie of Grease. So that was a given that I was going to cast it, and I did many other things on that too. But I had to go in and meet the Airplane boys because I was auditioning for that role as a casting director. And I went in and I met them. I loved the script. I was embarrassed to go in because I always read the script the morning before I go in for those things. And the script was full of spilled coffee from spit takes because I was laughing so hard. And the first question they asked me was, well, what about Ethel Merman? And I mean, because there was a very small cameo in the piece where Ethel Merman is in it. And I said, duh, have you ever thought of asking Ethel Merman? And they said, well, would she do this? And I said, she's in makeup and circling the building. Yes, she would do this.
So now, when you talk about The Boy in the Bubble, I don't know why it recently hit social media, but it was a story on Robert Reed didn't want Travolta to be a part of the project. It's two beautiful men. I mean, God, it was a brilliant story.
No, it's a brilliant story, but you have it a little bit. It wasn't that he didn't want Travolta. What it was Travolta was desperate to do something after his first season on Welcome Back, Kotter, so that people would know that he was not Vinnie Barbarino.
Right.
Because if you saw him as Vinnie, I mean, come on, his last name ends in a vowel, and he's from New Jersey. So, you think that he's going to be stuck in soprano land for the rest of his life. But Boy in the Plastic Bubble was like a 180-degree different kind of a character.
Wow. And
it was a TV movie that I knew that it would only take, he only had very little time off between season 1 and season 2. It's called the hiatus. But he could do this movie in that time period. He was unable to do another movie called Days of Heaven, which went to Richard Gere. And that project went on for like 6 months.
Wow.
So he wanted to do something, and this script came at the right time at the right place. So Travolta loved the script and wanted to do it, and as everybody else in the project did, except Robert Reed. Robert Reed was doing it for the paycheck.
Yeah.
He was doing it for the paycheck. And when he realized that he wasn't the center of the piece, which he was used to being, that everything had to be revolved around getting Travolta out in 17 days. And it was hard. His schedule was very hard. I understand it. One day, he has naturally curly hair, and he had to, one day the hair had to be straightened, and then it had to be rekinked and then straightened again.
Wow.
Those are not really pleasant experiences.
Right.
And he was a bit of a pain in the ass. And and then he was the only one in the cast who was like that. And I went into his dressing room to make nice. And as you have read in the book, I was giving him a back rub, and then, shall we say, the deed that shouldn't have been done got done. So we'll leave it at that. You got to read the book for the detail.
Well, speaking of reading this book, and there's so much in here because we all read the National Enquirers and the TV guides and things like that. Your book identifies the truth in the way that I had no clue that Miami Vice almost didn't get Don Johnson. I mean, I can't imagine that, but I read it in your book.
Yeah, I laid it out, I think, very, very accurately because, I was not, I loved Don as an actor, but he had done 3 pilots for NBC that failed. So the stupid network part of my brain said, well, do we want to do a 4th with Don? Okay. So I was on the fence and slightly negative. Another executive wanted Larry Wilcox from Chips, which I thought was a really stupid idea. And, we just couldn't get it together. And fortunately, my boss, the brilliant Brandon Tartikoff, said, well, why don't we just let the creators have who they want? And that was how that happened. And so they wanted Don, and obviously it worked. My contribution was Philip Michael Thomas.
That would have been a good one, too.
Well, no, it wasn't a good one. He was there. I mean, Philip Michael Thomas did get the part of his partner.
Right. And
I thought that they would be equal, but it just didn't work out that way. I mean, Don was definitely number 1, and Philip was Michael 2.
Yeah.
I had cast Philip Michael Thomas in a couple of plays and Broadway things, so I thought that he looked great, and I thought it would work. They were a good partnership, but you never know what's going to happen on television, and Don emerged as a much more dominant partner in that piece.
Yeah. I had a program director tell me one time that being a director of anything, it's 90% psychology. So when you are facing Ricky Schroeder and Jason Bateman, I mean, you had to have been a psychologist in making sure that Jason was a well-protected guy.
Well, yeah, because, I mean, it was, I don't know about a psychologist. I didn't do very well. but he was cast, and the combination was great. But who knew that Ricky Schroder's mother was going to be the villainess and say, "This is not we signed up for the Ricky Schroder show, not a pair, and which is a really dumb move, as opposed to Ronnie Howard's mother and family, who said we were thrilled to have Henry Winkler's success as Fonzie." It's just And unfortunately, I brought in Alfonso Ribeiro to replace Jason, which was, I thought it was a good idea, but it wasn't, because you needed someone really funny instead of two straight men.
Yeah.
So it worked out that way. But again, we knew what we were doing, because we knew we had Valerie's family coming up, and so we knew we wanted Jason for that. So we put Jason in another show that we knew was never going to last. But we kept him off the market until he was ready for Valerie's family. Yeah. This is a little deviousness on my part, but there is, I'll do anything to make sure that I get the person in the part, even if it takes a little deviousness.
Yeah.
Because, maybe that's why I was a good casting director.
in radio, there's one way. When we built teams, morning teams and afternoon drive teams, there were three elements that we had to have: a dick, a dork, and a deer. Did you go into any project like that as well?
No, but I love the word.
I mean, because you like you said, you were talking about how you had two leading guys with Ricky Schroder, and it was kind of a mismatch, and so I always look for that. Okay, this one's going to be different. He's got to be more different than the other guy. They can't be the same.
Well, it's called the chemistry, and no, come on, it's not even casting 101. You'd have to have a comedian and a straight man. Yeah, you need someone to. Here's another example that I did in the movie Grease. First of all, the Eve Arden character.
Oh the principal.
Principal. Well, I've been a big fan. She did a TV show and a radio show actually called Our Miss Brooks. And she did tons of movies where she was the sharp, acerbic woman and very, very funny. But I also knew that she had to play off somebody. You can't be acerbic if you're talking to yourself. Yep. So as the school principal, I said to the director, I said, Eve needs someone to play off of, so why don't we create a character called the school secretary? And I said, well, we somebody like Dodie Goodman. Well, if you've seen the movie, and I knew Dodie Goodman from her appearances on the Jack Barr show, yep. Late night talk show. And so that's how Dodie Goodman got into the movie, to be a foil for Eve Arden, and turned out to be wonderful. But I think I succeeded as a casting director because I always thought out of the box. Yep. I didn't take what was just given to me on the play, on the script. I always came up with suggestions that were I want to say a normal or a regular casting director just wouldn't do. But I didn't know I wasn't supposed to do that. That was just me.
Joel, you got to come back to this show anytime in the future. Like I said in the very beginning, you have just so much experience, and it needs to be shared with the entire world. I know they can get a huge part of it right now with Sex, Drugs, and Pilot Season, but I want to hear you tell the stories. So, man,
Thank you for having me. And it's #1 on Amazon in this category of movies. And as I've been saying, it's like my mother would finally say, it's okay, you didn't go to medical school. All right.
You be brilliant today, okay, sir?
Okay, thank you. Thanks for having me.